Problem number 7. The number of rooftops with solar panel installations in 5 cities is shown in the graph above. And it looks like here the horizontal axis is the cities, and they call the cities letters A through E. If the total number of installations was 27,500, what is the appropriate label for the vertical axis? Well, here city A has, whatever this 9 is, it has 9 installations. City B has 5. City C looks like it's 6. D has 4. And E looks like it's about 3.5. So if I add those up, I get 27.5. Well, the total is 27.5, but the question says the installations is 27,500. Looks like the answer is going to be letter C, the number of installations in thousands. Wyatt can husk at least 12 dozen ears of corn per hour and at most 18 dozen ears of corn per hour. So it looks like on the slow day, 12 dozen, and on the fast day, 18 dozen. It says, what is the possible amount of time in hours that it could take Wyatt to husk 72 dozen ears of corn? Well, on a slow day, if I let x be equal to the hours, if I do 12x equals 72, that would make x equal to 6. So it would take him 6 hours to husk the corn. On a fast day, it would take him x hours, so 18x equals 72, so x would be equal to 4. So on the fast day, it takes him 4 hours. On the slow day, it takes him 6 hours. So here your answer could be any number in between 4 and 6. This is a grid question, and you can grid in any number between 4 and 6, and it would be marked as correct. Questions 37 and 38 refer to this information. Jessica opened a bank account that earns 2% interest compounded annually. So every year it gains 2% interest. And it said her initial deposit is $100, and she uses this expression, 100 times x raised to the t power, to find the value of the account after t years. So what is the value of x? Well, you start off with your initial deposit of $100, and you multiply that by the interest raised to the power of t. So, for example, after 1 year, it earned whatever the interest is raised to the first power. After 2 years, it earns whatever the interest is to the second power. So here, since it gains 2% every year, if it starts off with 100% and gains 2%, basically every year it's earning 102% of what it was. And the way we write 102%, to convert that into a decimal, you basically move the decimal point 2 places to the left. So here the interest rate is going to be 1.02 to the t power, right? Because if you figure out how much money Jessica earned after the first year, you would do 100 times 1.02 to the first power, or basically she would have $102 after the first year. After the second year, she would take 100 and multiply it by 1.02 to the second power. You could take this and multiply it by 1.02, or you can take 100 and multiply it by 1.02 raised to the second power. So after the second year, she would have $104.04. So here the answer to number 37 is going to be 1.02. For number 38, we have Jessica's equation, which is 100 times 1.02 to the t power. It says her friend Tyshawn earns 2.5%. So Tyshawn starts off with 100% and adds 2.5% annually, which means every year he's up to 102.5% of what it was the previous year. And if you convert that back into a decimal, 1.025. So to Sean's equation, it says he started off with the same $100, but for him, you're going to multiply it by 1.025 to the t power. So it says, after 10 years, how much more money will Tyshawn's initial deposit earn than Jessica's? And it said, round your answer to the nearest cent and ignore the $sign when gridding in the response. So basically here we're dealing with 10 years. So we're going to be plugging in t is equal to 10 into each of these equations. So Jessica, you're going to do 100 times 1.02 to the 10th power. And then Tyshawn, you're going to do 100 times 1.025 to the 10th power. So it looks like here Jessica, after the 10 years, is going to have $121.90. And then after the 10 years, Tyshawn is going to have $128.01. And the question is saying, how much more money will Tyshawn have than Jessica? So basically what I'm going to do is just now subtract these two values to get my answer. So here the answer is going to be $6.11. Questions 4 and 5 refer to this information. The amount of money a performer earns is directly proportional to the number of people attending the performance. The performer earns $120 where 8 people attend. So basically what happens if two numbers are directly proportional, it basically means there's going to be a third number, so that if you take one of the numbers and multiply it by the third number, you get the next number. So basically what that means is if there are 8 people and the performer earns $120 for those 8 people, this other number in the question is going to be 120 divided by 8, or 15. Now what does that mean in the context of the question? This performer earns $15 per person who attends the performance. $15 per person, which means for number 4, if 20 people attend, you would take the 20 people, multiply it by the $15 per person, and here the performer would earn $300, or answer choice C. For problem 5, if the performer uses 43% of the money for costs involved in putting on the performance, and the rest is earned as profit. So 43% is the cost, which means if I take the 100% minus the 43, it looks like this performer earns 57% for profit. Now, the question says, what is the profits earned if 8 people attended? Well, in the question, they told you when 8 people attend, they take in $120. So that means 57% of the $120 is profits. So here I'm going to take 57%, so I'm going to turn that into a decimal by going 0.57. Of means times at 120, so I'm just going to multiply 0.57 times 120 to figure out how much is earned as profit, and here the answer is going to be answer choice C, $68.40. For problem 11, Tony is planning to read a novel. The table above shows the information about the novel, his reading speed, and the amount of time he plans to spend reading the novel each day. If Tony reads at the rates given in the table, which of the following is closest to the number of days it would take him to read the entire novel? So we're trying to figure out how long it's going to take him to read this whole book. Well, let's start at the top. It says the number of hours Tony plans to read the novel per day is 3. So he basically plans on reading 3 hours a day. Now, if I look here, it says Tony reads 250 words per minute. That's going to be important. The key is it says per minute. So if he's going to be reading 3 hours a day, and there's 60 minutes per hour, basically he's going to be reading for 3 hours or 180 minutes per day. So Tony's reading 180 minutes per day. But since he reads 250 words a minute and he reads 180 minutes per day, I can take the 250 words per minute and multiply it by the 180 minutes per day, and that's going to give me the number of words per day that he reads. So that tells me that he's going to be reading 45,000 words per day. If you multiply the words per minute times the number of minutes he reads per day, he's going to be reading 45,000 words per day. And that's going to be important because the question says, what is the number of days it will take him to read the novel? So this is a key number in the question. Well, in this case, they tell you that there are 349,168 words in the entire book. So this is the total, and he's reading 45,000 words per day. If I divide those two values, it's going to be about 7.75, 7.76 days of reading. Because if he does 45,000 words per day, and this is the total number of words, it's going to take him, looks like a little under 8 hours. So it says, which of the following is closest to the number of days? Here my answer is going to be letter B for 8 days. At Lincoln High School, approximately 7% of the enrolled juniors and 5% of the enrolled seniors were inducted into the Honor Society. So 7% of juniors, 5% of seniors. If there were a total of 562 juniors and 602 seniors enrolled, which of the following is closest to the total number of juniors and seniors last year who were inducted? Okay, so it says 7% of the juniors are in the Honor Society, and they told you that there were 562 juniors. We're going to do 7% of 562, and 7% is 0.07. So we're going to do 0.07 times 562. So that's going to give me 39.34. Now, obviously, there's not 0.34 of a person. So here, I guess if we round to the nearest person, it looks like there's going to be 39 juniors in the Honor Society. And then they say 5% of the seniors. So 5% of the seniors, and they tell you that there's 602 seniors. So I'm going to do 5% of 602. So that's going to give me 0.05 times 602. So that's going to give me about 30.1. So we round to the nearest person, we're going to get 30. So it looks like here there's 39 juniors, and it looks like here there's 30 seniors. So if I add them up, it looks like here my answer is going to be answer choice B, a total of 69 students. Problem 9, Nate walks 25 meters in 13.7 seconds. If he walks at the same rate, what is the closest to the distance, so that's the meters, he will walk in 4 minutes. Well, here's what we need to do. The question is saying, what is closest to the distance? So here, the distance is given in meters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of set up a proportion, and I'm going to kind of put the meters on the left-hand side. So he walks 25 meters in 13.7 seconds, the question says, how many meters will he walk in 4 minutes? But the problem is, here you have two different units of measurements. And what we want to do is we want to kind of convert them to the same unit of measure. And I think it's sometimes easier to do these questions if you convert to a smaller unit. So for example, if you have 4 minutes and there's 60 seconds in every minute, basically what that means is there's going to be 240 seconds in the 4 minutes. So now we're staying consistent. We have meters and meters on the left. We have seconds and seconds on the right, which means here we're going to have the proportion 25 over x equals 13.7 over 240. And the way you solve proportion questions when a fraction is equal to a fraction is you cross multiply. So 13.7x equals 240 times 25. So here we're going to have 13.7x equals, and we're going to multiply 25 times 240. So that's going to give me 6,000. And then here I'm going to divide both sides by 13.7 to get how many meters he's going to cover. And it looks like here you get 437.956. So the question here again says, which of the following is closest? So it looks like here our answer is going to be letter B, 450 meters. Problem 15, in order to determine if treatment X was successful in improving eyesight, a research study was conducted. From a large population, the number of people with in a large population of people with poor eyesight, 300 participants were chosen at random. Half of the participants were assigned to receive the treatment, half did not receive the treatment. The resulting data showed that the participants who received treatment X had significantly improved eyesight, while the people who did not receive the treatment were not as good. Based on the design and the results of the study, which of the following can be the appropriate conclusion? Well, when you take samples and you're trying to figure out if the sample is valid, there's a couple of factors that need to be true. Number one, you need to have a large population of people. You can't just take 3 people and do the study on those 3 and then base the results on those 3. So here the question says we do have a large population, so that's important. The next thing is you need to have a random selection process. The process can't be what they call biased. You can't take certain people and say, well, I'm going to pick these people because they're all redheaded. Maybe there's a comparison between redheaded and nearsightedness, which I don't think is true, but it has to be a random selection. And the third is that the people must be selected to random groups. So in this case here, you need to have a random selection process and then a random participant in different groups. And the question does say that. It says half the people received the treatment, half the people did not receive the treatment. So all 3 of these characteristics are true, which means letter A, treatment X is likely to improve the eyesight. Basically, there's enough information for the sample to be considered valid, and that result that you get from the trial is actually true. You don't know anything about substantial improvements. You don't know that it's always going to work. You don't know that it's better than all available treatments. I don't know anything about the other available treatments. We're just doing this treatment X. So here, letter A is the only one that is true. Problem 28. In planning maintenance for a city's infrastructure, a civil engineer estimates that, starting from the present, the population of a city will decrease by 10% every 20 years. So it's basically going to be dropping by 10% every 20 years. So if it drops 10% every 20 years and it starts off at 100%, basically the population is going to be 90% of what it was every 20 years. That's going to be a key number, 90%. If the present population is 50,000, so you see how all these answer choices have 50,000, which of the following represents the engineer's estimate of the population of the city T years from now? So you got to try to figure out, after T years, what's the population of the city? I think what I'm going to do is this. Since the question says it drops 90%, or it's 90% of what it was every 20 years, let's figure out what the population of the city is going to be in 20 years. If T was 20, it started off with 50,000, but then every 20 years, it's 90% of what it was. So when T is 20, we're just going to do 90% of 50,000, or 0.9 times 50,000, which means after 20 years, the population of the city is 45,000, not dollars, but people. So basically, when T is equal to 20, the answer to the question is 45,000. So this drops 10% every 20 years. In 20 years, it's 90% of what it was, and 90% of 50,000 is 45,000. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my T is equal to 20, plug it into these answer choices, and then see which of them gives me 45,000 people. So I plugged in 20 for all of the T's, and only answer choice D gives me the 45,000 people that I got as my answer. Again, when they give you a variable, I think what works most of the time is to choose a number for that variable that makes sense. That's why I let T be equal to 20, since the question said it drops 10% every 20 years. That was a smart choice of T. I figured out my answer based on my T value, and then I plugged in my 20 for all the different T's in the equations, and I saw which of the answer choices match the answer which I received. So in this case, the answer is letter D. While preparing to run a marathon, Amelia created a training schedule in which the distance of her longest run every week increased by a constant amount. If Amelia's training schedule required her longest run in week 4 is 8 miles, and her longest run in week 16 is 26 miles, which of the following best describes how the distance from Amelia that she ran from week 4 to week 16 changed? And here the key to the question is this. It says each week she increased by a constant amount. Every week it's going to change by the same amount. So in a simple example of that would be every week she increased by 1 mile. So she would run 1 mile more the next week than she did the previous week. Since it increased by a constant amount, that means a line is going to represent what's going on in the problem. It means you have a linear change. When things increase by the same amount, that's what we call a linear change. And since a line works to model that equation, we can use the geometry formula of y equals mx plus b. Now this question is saying, which of the following best describes the distance that her run changes between week 4 and week 16? So the rate of change is the slope. So this particular question is just asking you, find Amelia's slope. And from sophomore year, the slope formula was y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. If you have 2 points, x1, y1, and x2, y2, then you would just simply plug the values of those points into the slope formula to get your answer. So here it says, in week 4, she runs 8 miles. So in week 4, she runs 8 miles. That's going to be my first point. Then it says in week 16, she runs 26 miles. So that's going to be my second point, 16 comma 26. So now I'm going to substitute into this slope formula, y2, 26, minus y1, 8, over x2, 16, minus x1, 4. So that's going to give me 18 over 12, or 1.5 miles. So that means she increases her run by 1.5 miles per week. So her running goes up 1.5 miles per week. So which of the answer choices matches that? Letter A, she increases the distance of her longest run by 1/2 mile. No, it's 1.5 miles. Amelia increases the distance of her longest run by 2 miles each week. No, we saw it was 1.5 miles. Letter C, Amelia increased the distance of her longest run 2 miles every 3 weeks. Well, if it's 1.5 per week, every 3 weeks would be 4.5 miles. So that's not correct. I'm hoping letter D is correct. Amelia increases the distance of her longest run by 1.5 miles each week, and that's what the slope formula gave me, and that's why my answer is letter D. Problem 14, the expression above gives the amount of money in dollars generated in a year by depositing $1,000 in the bank account. So this is how much money is generated per year if you deposit $1,000. It says R is the interest rate, compounded monthly. Which of the following expressions shows the amount of additional money that is generated when the interest rate is 5%, then is generated when the interest rate is 3%? So here's what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to figure out the interest earned when the rate is 5%. So when the rate is 5%, I'm going to convert that to a decimal, so R is 0.05. Here I'm going to have 1,000 times 1 plus 0.05 over 1,200 raised to the 12th power. So it looks like here, if your interest rate is 5%, the amount of money you have at the end of the year is $1,000 and to the nearest cent, 50 cents. So that's how much money is earned if the interest rate is 5%. If the interest rate is 3%, so R would be now 3% or 0.03, the money you would have is 1,000 times 1 plus 0.03 over 1,200 raised to the 12th power. So now I'm going to do that on my calculator. So it looks like here, that's going to be $1,000.30. So the question says how much additional money? Well, it looks like from 1,050 to 1,030, the additional money is 20 cents. So here my answer is going to be 20 cents. So I want to see which of these answer choices gives me 20 cents. So I'm going to simplify all these expressions on my calculator and see which gives me 20 cents. So here the answer, I guess, is going to be answer choice D, because that's closest to 20 cents. I think there was an error in the typing of this question from the website, but I think that's what they were going for. That's the closest one to 20 cents, because it basically just does what it is we did for each of these parts here to get our answers. This minus this. So I'm going to go with answer choice D, but I think there was no answer there. Questions 37 and 38 refer to this information. The stock price of one share of a certain company is worth $360 today. The stock analyst believes the stock will lose 28%. So it's going to drop 28% of its value for each week over the next 3 weeks. So here's the equation that the analyst is using to represent the price of the stocks, where T represents the weeks. So it says, what value should the analyst use for R, the interest rate? Well, R is the interest rate. It says it drops 28%. So if it starts off at 100% and it drops 28%, here the stock is going to be worth 72% of what it was. So in this case here, your R value is 72%, but remember we always convert that to a decimal, so here the R value the analyst should use is going to be 0.72. So this is a grid question, so you would grid in 0.72. To the nearest dollar, what does the analyst believe the value of the stock will be at the end of the 3 weeks? Well, it's worth $360 today. It's going to be dropping 28%, so it's going to be worth 72% the following week. So I'm going to do 360 times 0.72 on my calculator, which means the next week it's going to be worth $259.20. So it starts off at 360. After week 1, it's worth $259.20. After week 2, it's going to take this $259.20 and multiply that by 0.72, which means after the second week, the stock is worth $186.62. And then week 3, it's going to be worth 72% of that. So I'll multiply that by 0.72. So here the value of the stock is 134.37. So the question says, to the nearest dollar. So to the nearest dollar, $134.34 to the nearest dollar is 134. So that would be your answer in the grid for this one.